I am the Ascended Master, Mother Mary, and I wish to discourse on an aspect of how Christ is imprisoned in this world. Now, so far, what we have explained is that you have God the Creator who decides to create form. Now, as Maitreya and Jesus have explained, there's a common misunderstanding in Eastern philosophy that Brahman is the undivided, undifferentiated principle or consciousness beyond all form. Thus, it is believed that as soon as there is differentiation into some kind of form, there is duality. But this, of course, is not the case, as Maitreya and Jesus have explained. But I wish to take this even further. What have we explained many times through our teachings? Well, we have talked about that the Creator, in order to create anything, first creates the Christ consciousness, the one mind, that is meant to maintain oneness between the Creator and the creation. But we have also explained that out of the one mind cannot anything be created by itself. And the reason for this is, of course, that the one mind is beyond all form and therefore cannot actually create form out of itself. So the Creator needs to create something that can manifest form. And that something is, that we have explained many times, the matter light. So what actually happens, what is the higher truth, the higher understanding of creation, is that the Creator, in order to create anything, does not create a duality, it creates a polarity. So there are different levels of polarities. We may say that the Creator represents the divine masculine, and the world of form represents the divine feminine, the father and the mother in a polarity. But of course, even within the world of form, there are many polarities. We can say, for example, that the spiritual realm, which is the ascended sphere, represents the divine masculine, whereas the unascended sphere, the material universe, represents the divine feminine. But there are, of course, innumerable such polarities. So, this is not duality. The differentiation into the Divine Father and the Divine Mother and the Divine Son is not, not duality. Why? Because even though there is a polarity between the Creator and the world of form, they exist in a harmonious balance. And what maintains that balance? The consciousness of the Son, the only begotten of the Father, the Christ mind, that maintains oneness between the Creator and the world of form, between the Divine Father and the Divine Mother. So you see without creating differentiation, no form can be created. But forms are not created in a vacuum. They are not created to exist alone, to be separate. Forms are always created as a result of a polarity. Ultimately, the polarity between the creator and the matter light, or the world of form. But even within the world of form, many polarities, alpha and omega, the spiritual realm, the unascended sphere, ascended masters, unascended beings, extensions of the masters, you, I am presence, the conscious you, your outer being, your mind, your physical body, so forth and so on. So what has happened is that in Eastern philosophy, going very, very far back in time, there was an influence from the fallen beings that influenced even the early Vedic rishis or seers. In many other religions, in the monotheistic religions in the West, there was also an influence from the fallen beings. And what did Jesus just explain is the purpose of the serpentine mind. It is to divide you from Christ within you, to separate you from Christ within you. So, separation, opposition, denial, this is what creates duality. You see the symbol from Taoism of the yin and yang, where the black and the white field are intertwined. Now, if you were to put this symbol on a disc and spin it, you would see that they start to blend together. This is the polarity of the father and the mother. They are always held in a dynamic balance. And what holds the balance is the Christ mind, the Son. The serpentine mind wants to divide the father and the mother by perverting the Son. This, of course, cannot be done in reality, but it can be done in the minds of self-aware beings who have not yet ascended, and especially those who have gone below the 48th level of consciousness. So, a very long time ago, when the fallen beings first came to Earth, they decided, how can we create maximum division on Earth? Well, we divide the Divine Father and the Divine Mother by using the serpentine logic to counteract the experience of the Christ mind, to make people doubt the Christ mind within them. And this, in the East, led to this idea that Brahman, the undifferentiated Brahman, is the ultimate reality, and that the entire world is illusory and is an enemy of your spiritual growth. In the West, or at least in the Middle East, you saw the emergence of these religions that also portrayed God as the male father figure, the angry, judgmental being in the sky. And what does this do? Well, it does, of course, many things. But when it comes to imprisoning Christ, what is one of the most severe imprisonments of Christ that you see on earth? It is the imprisonment of Christ in women. Look how both Eastern and Western religions put down women as being secondary to men, or even the cause of the fall of humankind. This was a doing of the fallen beings, as we have explained before, who said, How can we create maximum chaos on earth so that we can gain control? Well, let us divide men and women, for they cannot run away from the sex of their physical bodies. So by portraying women as being inferior to men or being guilty, we can prevent women from expressing their Christhood. For they can come to be seen both as from men and from themselves as being unworthy to manifest Christhood. So here you have these very old traditions where religious leaders are only men, where prophets or seers or spokespeople or messiahs are only men, where gurus are only men. And of course, this puts down the Christ in women and has prevented many women throughout history from expressing their Christhood, even daring to consider that they could have it and express it. But it also puts down the Christ in men. Because what is it that is the role of the Christ? It is to balance the two basic polarities of creation between the Creator and the world of form, between the Divine Father and the Divine Mother. And how is that basic polarity expressed on earth? Between men and women. So, if there is no polarity between men and women, there is a duality. And even though these religions claim that men are superior to women and that men have the higher spiritual potential, it is not true. For men alone cannot attain a higher state of consciousness without balance between the two basic polarities. Now, this doesn't mean that men need women or physical interaction with women to reach a higher level of consciousness, or that women need physical interaction with men to reach a higher state of consciousness. But it does mean that both men and women have to balance the masculine and feminine within their own beings. And when you have a planet where women are universally put down as inferior, that becomes much more difficult to attain. It can be done, as some people have done, but the vast majority of people have not done so. So there is no basic inequality between the divine masculine, the divine feminine, the father, the mother, even men and women on an undescended planet. It is not that one is more important or superior to another. For where did the matter light come from? From the Father's being. So they are not separated in the mind of God, can never be separated in the mind of God. Therefore, the mind of God does not need the Christ, the Son, to see the balance between the masculine and feminine, because it sees it at two sides of itself, two expressions of itself. So the Christ is needed not for God's sake, but for the sake of unascended beings, and even ascended beings who also use the Christ mind to rise to higher and higher levels. So we can say, what is it that allows you to rise to higher levels of consciousness? What is the difference between an ascended master that is working with earth, which is the lowest level of the ascended realm, and Alpha and Omega, who are at the highest level? Well, the difference is actually the balance between the divine feminine and the divine masculine. And it is difficult to describe this balance with words because you always think in terms of the linear mind who wants to set up a scale. But we can say that an ascended master at the lowest level of the ascended realm has a certain balance between the masculine and feminine. It is not that it's wrong or unbalanced, but it has a certain balance between the two. And the higher you go in the ascended realm, the more refined the balance becomes. So Alpha and Omega, that are the highest self-aware beings in the world of form, they have the most refined balance between the two. Now, what is it that is said for most human beings, certainly human beings who have gone into duality, even the fallen beings who are in duality? Well, they don't have a balance between the two because in their beings, the two are dualistic opposites. So they are actually working against each other. And the fallen beings, the deeper they are into the fallen consciousness, the more opposition and tension they have between the two polarities. That is why they are in this state of constant agitation, because they are always having to suppress one or the other polarity in order to maintain some kind of ability to function psychologically. And it is a constant ongoing battle, which is why the lowest level of fallen beings are the most angry, the most intense. They, of course, don't see themselves as the lowest. They think they are the most sophisticated and therefore the most advanced and the highest level of fallen beings. But they are in the lowest level of consciousness because they have the greatest imbalance, or rather conflict, between the two polarities. And so those who are above the 48th level, they have started to restore some level of balance between the masculine and feminine in their own beings. But of course, they haven't reached that level of balance between the two that allows you to ascend. And what is that level of balance that allows you to ascend? Well, on Earth, you are in a physical body. The body has either a male sex or a female sex. And given the long history of Earth of defining these roles for men and women, you are affected by this. And most societies have a great imbalance between men and women, and even the more advanced democracies in the world still have an imbalance. So you have been brought up with this imbalance where you tend to define yourself based on the sex of the physical body. But what is the Christ mind? The Christ mind, despite the way it has been portrayed, is neither male nor female. For the Christ mind existed before there was any differentiation into a masculine and feminine polarity. That is how it can maintain balance between the two. So in order to reach the point of balance, you need to overcome the imbalance in the collective consciousness. It doesn't mean that you are still not in a male body or you don't see yourself as a man or a woman, but it does mean that you overcome the imbalance in the culture you grew up in, where you don't identify yourself based on these traditional roles that men and women have been assigned over the ages. You literally transcend it. where you are neither a man or a woman, but nor are you asexual. I know this sounds contradictory, but it is another example of what Maitreya called the enigmas that you have to resolve as you grow on the path. And how do you resolve an enigma? Well, by realizing, if you want the universal formula, that an enigma only seems like an enigma or contradiction when viewed through the filter of the duality consciousness. And what is the universal way to overcome the duality consciousness? To make contact with the Christ. And when you experience the Christ mind, it is not that you actually solve the riddle of the enigma. You just see that the enigma was only there when seen from a certain viewpoint. And now that you have a Christ perspective, you're no longer seeing from inside the separate self. So the enigma fades away. Now, some of these enigmas you can express in words. And what the conceptual mind does is it wants to project that there must be some teaching in words that can resolve the enigma. And this is where many, many spiritual people, many well-meaning people throughout the ages have gotten stuck. Because they think that what has been defined with words as a riddle or an enigma can be solved through words. But this is not the case. Not even the Christ mind can come up with words that resolve an enigma created by the serpentine mind. For it is unreal. Now, many years ago, Jesus gave you this teaching that there is one particular thing he wants you to remember, so that if he woke you up at 4 o'clock in the morning and said, "What is it you have to remember?" you would know what it is. And it is this: that which is real cannot be affected by that which is unreal. Now you see, many of you who are spiritual people, you are avatars. So you came from a natural planet to Earth. You know you are more mature, more evolved than most of the people on Earth. You have often interacted with the fallen beings, and you have experienced that the fallen beings are very sophisticated in coming up with these arguments or lines of reasoning or logic, the serpentine logic, even if you have not called it that. So as avatars, you have often formulated over many lifetimes, going back to your birth trauma, this desire that you can out-reason the fallen beings, that you can find a way to use logic to outmaneuver the fallen beings. And some of you have experienced that in some situations you can outmaneuver or baffle the fallen beings by using logic. And some of you have become trapped, as this messenger was trapped for many lifetimes, in thinking that you are so smart that you can outmaneuver the fallen beings. But you see, you cannot. You may achieve some temporary success in specific situations where you can show the inconsistencies of the argumentation of a fallen being. But what are the fallen beings using to come up with their arguments? Well, the dualistic mind, the serpentine mind. So what are you using to counteract this? Also the serpentine mind, the dualistic mind. So it is simply a matter of you as an avatar becoming better at using the serpentine mind than a particular fallen being. But what does this do to you as an avatar? It keeps you trapped in a dualistic mindset. Even if you are not as aggressive as the fallen beings, you are still trapped in duality, because you cannot attempt to catch the greased pig without being covered in mud, as the popular expression is. You are essentially like two fish in the ocean. The fallen being is a fish, and you are a fish. But you think you are so smart that you are not wet. When you are reasoning with a fallen being and trying to outsmart them, you think you are not wet. But you are wet because you are swimming in the ocean of the serpentine mind. So there is no ultimate understanding that will solve the problems on earth. This is again what we might call the curse of the modern rational age. You look at how humanity was trapped in what is called the Dark Ages, where people had all kinds of superstitions. And now science and rational thinking has raised you into this wonderful technological age, where you know so much more, you understand how the world works, and you can create all this sophisticated technology that makes life easier, right until the point where somebody pushes the nuclear button. That is also a result of the technology and the rational mind. So there is this belief that has been multiplied by the fallen beings, and it actually originates from them, that if you can understand how the world works, you can control your destiny. This is what the fallen beings have attempted to do ever since they fell, and some even before. They think that if you can understand the mechanics of how the world of form works, you can control the world of form. And you can achieve some success, as you see in modern technology. But this mindset has led to the point where many people, even many avatars, believe that if only you have the ultimate understanding, you can solve all problems on earth. And this has caused many, many spiritual students to approach a spiritual teaching, especially the Ascended Master teachings, with this belief that we of the Ascended Masters can give you the ultimate solution to any problem on earth in the form of an outer teaching expressed in words. In other words, the rational mind thinks that any problem can be described with words or images or mathematical formulas. So there is an understanding that can be expressed in words that will resolve any problem. But this is not the case, because words are inherently dualistic. They can be interpreted by the dualistic mind to mean this or to mean the opposite. So there is no limit to the kind of problems that can be created by the serpentine mind, by the separate mind, the dualistic mind. And many of those problems can be described in words. But the Christ mind cannot come up with a formulation in words that can resolve any problem, any enigma, any riddle. And so many students have come to Ascended Master teachings expecting that we can explain everything in such a way that the problems go away. But as we have explained now many times from many different perspectives, this cannot be done. Certainly, there are some issues in your psychology that can be resolved with words, because you have a certain belief that is formulated in words, and that belief forms the basis for a subconscious self. And when you uncover the belief, there is a worded statement that can counteract it, help you see the unreality of the belief and resolve it. But it is not just the words that do this. It is also that you contact the Christ mind. And the Christ mind is beyond words. You will see the Gospel of John that talks about in the beginning was the Word. Well, the better translation, as we have explained, is actually the Logos. But even if we take this, the Word is more than words. Because the Word is a state of mind that you experience. And that is why we have said also that a subconscious self always projects that there's a problem that can be described in words that you, the conscious you, have to solve. But you will never solve the problems generated by the dualistic mind. You will only be free when you see that this is unreality. And you decide to no longer try to solve the problem, but to just walk away from the problem. Now again, take care to not use the linear mind here, because what have we said? There are 144 levels of consciousness. For each level of consciousness, there is an illusion. But it is not that this illusion forms some kind of riddle expressed in words, and you have to resolve it at the level of the words. It's that you come to see the unreality of the illusion. And instead of trying to solve it at the level where the illusion is formulated, you reach for the Christ mind, whereby you experience a reality beyond the level where the illusion resides. Even at the 144th level, where you have overcome a lot of illusions, you still need the Christ mind to go beyond that last illusion. This is the whole idea found in Zen Buddhism of the koan. The koan was thought of because so many students came with this rational linear mind, wanting an explanation, thinking that some kind of guru should always be able to come up with a statement in words that could resolve the students' questions, answer the questions. But the solution was to step outside the linear, rational, conceptual mind. And the koans are meant to help you do this. And so, in a sense, all of our teachings are koans. But of course, in this modern age, we adapt our teachings to people's way of thinking. And there is, of course, value in understanding. We are not saying that the linear mind, the rational mind, is completely wrong or bad or useless. We are only saying that it has certain limitations. So we give you many teachings that help you expand your worldview, expand your understanding of how the cosmos works, how it was created, what your place in it is. But what helps you rise to a higher level of consciousness is not that you come to understand with a rational, linear, logical, analytical mind, but that you shift out of that mind and therefore transcend what this mind sees as a riddle, as an enigma, as a question, as a contradiction, as a problem that must be solved. You see, in essence, at each of the 144 levels of consciousness, there seems to be a problem. And the conceptual mind thinks that the only way to rise above that problem, to rise to a higher level of consciousness, is to resolve the problem at that level of consciousness. But you cannot resolve a problem at the same level of consciousness where the problem is formulated. Because from that level of consciousness, you cannot see beyond the problem. You can only see the problem. So the solution is to contact the Christ mind, which is not affected by the problem, even though the problem is created out of the Christ mind. The Christ mind is not affected by the problem. Why? Because that which is real cannot be affected by that which is unreal. You could, from a certain perspective, say that in the world of form, only the Christ mind is ultimately real. This is, of course, not the full understanding, but you could say this, and therefore you could say that any form is created out of the Christ mind, which means that from any level of consciousness, whatever situation you are in, you can contact the Christ mind. And when you do contact the Christ mind, you experience that there's something that is more real than the problem you are seeing at that level of consciousness. And in seeing that there's something more real than the problem, you see that the problem is not ultimately real. And therefore, instead of trying to solve it at that level, you can walk away from it. You can surrender it. This is what I exemplified in my last embodiment as the mother of Jesus. Nevertheless, Father, not my will, but thine be done. Be it unto me according to thy will. Because I had a certain outer vision in my mind of how my life should go. And now I received this impulse that it should go in a different direction. And by contacting the Christ mind within me, I was able to surrender my outer vision and submit to the higher vision that I had put in my divine plan before I came into embodiment. And this is what many of you have done, many of you are working on, reconnecting to the higher vision in your divine plan instead of the outer vision that you formulated as you were growing up, often affected by parents, family, and society. And so again, this is not the rational mind, because the rational mind will look at your life and say, oh, you should never have done this spiritual thing. You should have focused on the practical aspects, getting an education, getting a career, doing this, doing that, buying a house, saving money, saving up for your retirement, all of these things. Many of you have experienced that family members will use the rational mind to say that you should not have followed the spiritual path. But you experienced the Christ mind within you, that there was something more important to you than following these outer goals and norms and standards. And therefore, your life took the direction it has taken. And it can, of course, go much further when you increase your intuition. So you see here, what does this all lead to? Well, it leads to, first of all, the recognition that Christ is more imprisoned in women than it is in men, in the sense that women have for so long been put down as being secondary citizens who could not reach a higher level of consciousness. So there is a need to free women. However, men are also imprisoned because even though they have been portrayed as superior to women, without the balance between the masculine and feminine, they also cannot reach a higher level of consciousness. So there is a need for people to see this lack of balance and to realize that the balance was created, the imbalance was created through this conceptual mind that created concepts out of separation and duality and projected them upon both men and women, defining these traditional roles that limit both men and women. Even the men who are seemingly in a superior position in these patriarchal societies, they are still limited by that role, as more and more men in these societies are beginning to realize. And so what is the solution? Well, it is not to actually solve a problem at the level of consciousness where the problem is created. It's to transcend that level of consciousness. I'm not here putting down the entire process leading to a greater liberation of women. As I've said before, women had to start with arguing for the right to vote, and they had to point out other discriminations against women. And this is all valid enough to do. But from a spiritual perspective, it is not actually a matter of creating equality between men and women based on these traditional roles. It is not a matter of redefining the role of women, redefining the role of men so they are more equal. It's a matter of transcending these roles and the consciousness that created them. And this is the general principle. As we have said, everything is created, every concept, every idea is actually created out of the Christ consciousness. Even if it is seemingly in the consciousness to duality, separation, and antichrist, it is created out of the Christ mind. But the Christ mind doesn't become it. And therefore, by contacting the Christ mind, experiencing that the Christ mind itself is more real than the expression, the dualistic expression, instead of trying to resolve the problem or change the conditions, you can simply walk away from the consciousness and a people trapped in that consciousness. This is the principle of surrender. You are refusing to remain trapped in the consciousness that defined the problem. And when you transcend that consciousness, you are freeing Christ within you. Because while you are still trapped in trying to solve the problem, Christ in you is imprisoned by that level of consciousness that defined the problem. So how do you ultimately free Christ in you? By transcending that consciousness, by transcending these traditional roles for both men and women, refusing to conform and reaching a higher view of yourself, a higher view of the opposite sex, which now is no longer opposite because you see the polarity. And this opens up for a new way to approach relationships, of course, between men and women, where you can strive to have that polarity rather than the opposites that is built into these traditional roles. And therefore, the two polarities supplement and complement each other, and they are more together than each of them are alone. And this is the basis for the relationships of the Golden Age, where you not only liberate women from the suppression, but you also liberate men from being the suppressors. Because both are just roles, and both of them are locked into it, even if it seems like men have some physical advantages by being in a privileged position. They are still locked, trapped in these roles. And so in this decade of women, naturally, it is important that some women begin to contemplate this. And of course, that some men also contemplate it. And therefore, become the forerunners for transcending the consciousness that suppresses women. There is always an alpha and omega, a masculine and a feminine. And the omega, the practical aspect, is that you address the suppression of women, the discrimination against women. You demand equality, you demand that this be changed. But the alpha is that you transcend the entire consciousness. And you do this by realizing, experiencing that the Christ in you is neither male nor female. It is in between the two polarities, and it balances the two. Now, as long as you are in a physical body, you will have male and female energies in your energy field. And therefore, you need to balance the two. But it is the Christ that does this. And when you realize that the conscious you is meant to be the Christ, to be in the nexus of the figure-eight flow, then you are no longer identified with the sex of the body and the roles associated with it in your society. And that is when you can have the maximum impact of raising your society beyond these traditional, confrontational, conflict-creating roles for men and women. Now, with this, I have given you what I wanted to give you in this installment. Much more can be said and will, as we move along in our progressive revelation, be said. But for now, I have given you a foundation for liberating the Christ in both men and women, thereby liberating the Christ from having to conform to these traditional roles that truly spring from this turning the basic polarities of God into opposites that work against each other and can only create conflict. So you have my gratitude for being willing to be the broadcast stations for this message to be projected into the collective consciousness, where it has already touched many people who are in tune with the Divine Mother and who are ready to step up to a higher level of conscious awareness of the changes that need to happen in this decade of women and beyond. So for this, you have my gratitude.